So in this session, we're going to be exploring karma, an understanding of karma. And it's important to remember that what we're going to be discussing is a model and is a theory. And as a model and a theory, karma can be useful for us. But ultimately, karma is a mystery. So the purpose of this talk is to give you some tools, some ideas, some principles, some understanding of the model of karma, so that you can pacify your mind enough that you can get on with the business of your life and practicing yoga. So we're going to be looking at an understanding of karma, breaking free of the cycle of rebirth. For the most part, that's why people practice yoga, meditation, spirituality, Buddhism, you name it. The whole purpose of it is to experience freedom. Freedom within this life, more importantly, eternal freedom. Freedom beyond this particular life experience. And as I've reflected upon life and karma and our little blips in time that we have for our personalities and our life experiences, what I recognized is that life is eternal. Although our bodies, our personalities may die, may change, but that which animates life is eternal. I remember when I was looking at some Christmas tree lights one time. It was during a period when I was going through a lot of grief because of a loss. And I was extremely upset and sad. And I looked up at these Christmas tree lights, and I saw that most of the lights were lit up. But there were a few of them that had burned out, that were no longer there anymore. And for some reason in that moment, in that experience, I recognized that there is a current of electricity, there is a current of power going through this chain of lights. And while some of the physical manifestations of the light had burnt out, well, the electricity, the power, which was the source of that light, was still flowing through the chain of lights. And I started to recognize that this life is like that electricity. And what's most important is that we pay attention to the electricity, to our spirit, rather than sinking too much of our awareness into the externals, because all lights go out eventually, but the source of the light, the power of that light, doesn't. Now we need to consider what is karma, and we're going to get a little technical here throughout. I typically don't like to get technical because it's just more stuff for the mind to think about, but for our purposes today, it'll be okay for a little bit. So the question is, what is karma? Well, as we see here, karma is a Sanskrit term, and it's derived from the verb root kri, meaning to act, do, or make. It embodies the principle of causation, of cause and effect. The actions that we perform, the thoughts that we habitually think, our mental and emotional states, and our general state of consciousness all determine the experience of our life. And as you see here, the verb root is kri. And we are studying Kriya Yoga. So Kriya also relates to this idea of karma. And Kriya Yoga are actions which lead us to yoga or union or a more holistic perspective and experience of life. And in this statement here, this actually comes from Richard Fish. A lot of this that we're going to be seeing comes from the book The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology. There's a section in there that Richard Fish wrote that deals with karma. So these are his words. The actions that we perform, the thoughts that we habitually think, our mental and emotional states, and our general state of consciousness all determine our life experience. So when you want to know what your karma is, you don't have to go to an astrologer. I mean, you might if you're profoundly dense and dull and just can't pay attention to your life. But all you need to do to know what your karma is to observe. What are the thoughts that habitually go through your mind? What are your mental and emotional states like? What is the general state of your consciousness? That is your karma. That is your karma related to your specific life experience as Amanda or Betsy or Bobby or Bradley. Just pay attention to that. That's your karma. Habitual thoughts and actions have an accumulative influence on our mental and emotional outlook, as well as upon our physical condition. Such repetitive thoughts and actions imprint themselves on our mind and memory, creating what are called samskaras. These samskaras, the karmic result of repetitive thoughts and actions, mold and condition the expression of our character and personality, as well as our physical body. Now, I remember when I was first getting interested in meditation and Kriya Yoga specifically, I was towards the end of my college career, and while I did very well in college, I had a mind for the stuff that I was studying. What was I spending most of my time doing? Well, of course, I was studying things like philosophy, psychology. I was very much into occult sciences, understanding ways of being. I was thinking about all of that. But I spent most of my time playing video games, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, playing music, occasionally going for a hike. And so my mind and my consciousness and my body was not very well set up. And I was weak mentally. I was weak physically. I remember my brother-in-law, Michael, he wanted to go do a backpacking adventure for spring break. And he was a very fit guy. And he is a very fit guy. And I certainly was not. And he thought it'll be great. We'll just go down to the Tennessee Wall and we'll do this. And I remember going with him, and he put this backpack on me, which is more weight than I'd probably ever carried in my entire life. And the first step out of the car, he says, "We're going over there." And it was essentially following a mountain path straight up for longer than I'd ever hiked. So after about 40 feet, I collapsed. And he came over and he grabbed my pack with one hand and picked it up and essentially carried me up the mountain. And it was at that time I started to recognize, wow, something needs to change here. And I recognized that I had an image of myself as a weak, not very well-developed person. And so what did I do? Well, in order to start to change, I knew I had to create a new image of myself. So being interested in occult things, I created this little ritual, and I drew a picture of how I saw myself in my mind's eye. And when I thought about it, what I saw myself was as thin, and my arms and legs were all wobbly and weak, gray, just not an individual full of a lot of life or strength. And so I looked at that and I decided I'm going to imagine that this is a separate aspect of myself, an entity, and I'm just going to banish it. And I'm going to invite back a strong version of myself. And I did that, and from that point forward, I began to do my best to affirm that I was strong, that I could quit smoking, that I didn't have to do these things which ate up a lot of my time and didn't really do much for my life. And it was hard in the beginning, but the changes eventually began to occur because since I was changing my image of myself, when those opportunities arose to do these things which were not good for me, I now had the choice to say, no, I'm not doing that this time. I was making it more conscious that I was choosing. And as the years went by, and it took years, this was not something that happened overnight, I began doing Qigong. I began hiking longer. After about a year of that, I began doing yoga. After about a year of that, I began doing kettlebell routines. After a year of that, it just kept going, but I did it slowly. I didn't just jump into this stuff very quickly. And in time, there was a greater sense of strength, a greater sense of capability, and that spread through the rest of my life. So I began in that way, even before I was specifically practicing yoga, to change these samskaras. And this is how you do it, slowly over time. Now, what is reincarnation? Reincarnation is something that is tied to the idea of karma. Because why do we have to reincarnate? Well, we have to reincarnate to experience all the stuff that's in our storehouse of desires. And you can't usually do that in one lifetime. So this is why we come back the next time, and we come back the next time, until eventually all those things are exhausted, hopefully, assuming we're living a yogic lifestyle. By living yogically, by meditating, we exhaust these things, so we lose our attachment to them. Most people, what they do is they perpetuate their karma, meaning they're attached to circumstances, ideas of prestige, power, money, fame, relationships, and since they're attached to it and they don't want to let them go, well then, next time they're going to come back again and they're going to continue this pattern. It just keeps repeating itself. And so this relates to the idea of reincarnation. And so reincarnation is the doctrine, reincarnation, or the doctrine of return, teaches that we repeatedly are reborn into a physical body after a period of rest in the astral realm. And, more people are trying to get in. As long as we have attachments and desires that can only be fulfilled in the physical world, we will be drawn back again and again into physical incarnation. The causes or karmas generated by our thoughts and actions in one life are unlikely to be able to manifest the results and consequences in that one lifetime. Now, if you look at this picture here, I've seen this picture for years, and there's another picture that we're going to use too, which I've really found interesting. And you can see, how does it work? Well, you go through the life cycle of being born, of growing old, of dying, and death is that change. It's the gateway. You see, the old man is folded over, and he's going into this part of the infinity symbol. And then coming out the other side, what do you see on the other side? Well, you see a beautiful woman in white, and the child comes forth. That's when life is new and fresh. And it just continues in this way. It continues happening. And we can see the same thing with the animals down here, the evolution of animals. Consciousness keeps evolving based on our desires. And so reincarnation keeps occurring because we keep either wanting more, we want to experience something different, and we never break that cycle of craving. You don't have to be addicted to drugs or love or sex or money in order to have an addiction. You can have an addiction to life experience itself. And that is why you're in this human form. That is why you've incarnated in this particular time, in this particular culture, in this particular situation. Because this time, this culture, this situation, this family, your friends, all hold the possibility for you to experience those desires or accretion of desires from the past. You may say, well, I didn't want to experience this, I didn't want to experience that. Well, on some level, you did. And it's not always for the levels you think. Many people make the idea of karma very black and white, as though, this person suffered and died because they did something bad in a past lifetime. Well, we cannot know the full scope of karma while we are a little personality. We can know the full scope of karma once we practice yoga and we go into higher states of consciousness. As Laurel said, in her talk yesterday on the Yamas and Niyamas, I believe that in the Yoga Sutras it states that through non-attachment, one understands the cycle of birth and death. Because if you're not attached to all the stuff that's going on, you can rise above it and look down and see all the ideas, all the thoughts, all the desires that played into that. But you can't do it when you're caught up in attachments. When someone suffers and dies, you can't just simply make a blanket statement that they had bad karma. Maybe they had wonderful karma. Maybe it was that experience of suffering and death which drove them into an intensified experience of recognizing what is real. And maybe that experience of death and suffering that they went through, maybe for the people around them, maybe the people around them said, well, I didn't want that karma. I didn't want to watch this person go through that. But maybe that experience drove them into a deeper understanding of faith. Maybe many years ago, the person said, I want to know what true faith is. I want to experience depth of faith. So the universe says, great, we'll do that. And so we often think we want to experience a greater depth of faith, and so therefore all these beautiful, wonderful things are going to happen. And there might be some of that. But in order to experience a profound depth of faith, sometimes the most horrendous suffering is what drives us into it. So the reason I'm bringing these kinds of things up is because we can't judge good or bad karma. That's not for us. Because things that seem negative and horrible and difficult in this lifetime might have a profound effect on our spiritual realization, which is ultimately wonderful karma. So try not to be too black or white about it. Now, what can we do about karma? So much of our accumulated karma can only be exhausted through rebirth. This movement from the physical to the astral realms and back again continues over vast stretches of time until the spirit soul finally neutralizes its karmic desires and attachments and becomes satisfied in manifesting its true nature. A state of consciousness which is not dependent upon nor conditioned by the world of manifestation. And that's heavy stuff right there. Let's read it again. Much of our accumulated karma can only be exhausted through rebirth. This movement from the physical to the astral realms and back again continues over vast stretches of time until the spirit soul finally neutralizes its karmic desire and attachments and becomes satisfied in manifesting its true nature. A state of consciousness which is not dependent upon nor conditioned by the world of manifestation. Many of us think of our soul as being this thing which is like our personality that persists through time, jumps from one body to another, as though, Ryan, with all of his joys and frustrations and ideas and personality quirks, as though when that dies, somehow it's going to go into this nebulous realm of light and then come back in another body with all those same things, with the same personality, the same kind of experience. However, it's really not how it goes. You might recall in our meditation this morning, I was encouraging you to abide as the witness, to pull back to that which you are, which is experiencing this talk right now, which is aware of the fact that you are a body watching, listening to this talk, which is the same thing that was there 5 years ago when you were alone, which is the same thing that was there when you were 4 years old and having the time of your life on your swing set, singing your heart out. That is the idea of soul. That is what we can think of as soul, not the personality. Because if your personality was your soul, well, then it would never change. And we know that hopefully you evolve and you grow and your understanding shifts, and therefore your behavior and your actions shift. So how do we exhaust our karma? Through rebirth, through just having the experiences of life. All the experiences of life. You might have heard me say before, whenever I experience something in life, something negative, I don't sit there and dwell upon, oh my goodness, is this going to happen again? Sometimes if it's horrendously traumatic, yes, I might. But I'm aware enough to know that trauma can stick with you and you just might have to be aware of it and move through it. But at other times, things that occur that seem kind of random but are difficult and negative, well, what do is I say to myself, well, I'm glad I'm done with that karma, because it had to exhaust, it had to come up and it had to express because it was deep down in there. And if I say I'm glad I'm done with that karma and I let it go, well, then it's exhausted. But if it comes up and something happens and I say, oh my goodness, is that going to happen again? Where did that come from? And I dwell upon it. What am I doing there? I am perpetuating the cycle of that karma to happen again and again. So that's why as things occur, your best approach, and meditation and yoga helps you with this, is to observe it, release it. It may be that in that point in time, you are not done with that karma. It might be that there's still a little bit more, but every time something occurs and you release it, that's one more string cut towards a particular kind of experience, until eventually it's no longer there. I mean, think about the stuff that you experienced when you were younger. Hopefully you're not experiencing that now, because you've learned to outgrow it. You've learned to let it go. Now, as long as we remain embodied and engaged in these realms, awareness of our true identity continues to be limited and incomplete. To remedy this situation, various spiritual paths and practices have been expounded. When we adopt the spiritual path most suited to our temperament and understanding, we begin to free ourselves from the conditioning and attracting powers of nature. We also learn how to neutralize our karma. Now, the best text that I have found, my copy might be at home on my bedside, is a description that Swami Sri Yukteswar gives in The Holy Science, where he describes how there is an evolution of consciousness from the highest, clearest spiritual realms, and eventually it becomes involved in nature, and it becomes a rock, and then plant life, and then animal life, and then human life. But it goes on from there to what he describes as like angelic life, and then the completely free, which is returning back to source. And so when we look at that, again, this is something that we explore in the Holy Science, the book, but also in the class, which I will be offering again here, either in a few months or at the beginning of next year. The recognition of that is the human state is not the end. It's a transitionary period to begin to attain and understand these angelic realms, and then the completely free realms, the sannyasi. And so our purpose here is not to get all mired down in all this stuff that we think is so important. That's part of our karma that we're exhausting as we learn to redirect our awareness inward to find out what is true, that which transcends this. So this statement here is simply pointing out that this realm of awareness that we are as a human being, it is attractive, it is dense, oftentimes it is all we know. But since we're engaged in things like spiritual practice and yoga, we have an intuition and understanding that there is more to it. And that by engaging these practices, we learn to mature spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and rise through these things. In my own life, the things that I thought were so important when I was younger, even 20 years ago and 10 years ago, those things have lost their attraction. And after practicing meditation and yoga for so long, eventually you start to catch glimpses of what many people can call the inner world, the inner life, that eternal aspect of you. And yes, you still might be frustrated or aggravated at things that happen to the body or things that happen in your life, and you still may enjoy the beautiful things of life, but you know that they're not lasting because you've seen how life goes. And so it doesn't disturb you so much anymore. Your consciousness doesn't sink into it as though that's the only thing. And that is why the more you practice yoga and meditation and yoga becomes supremely enjoyable, because you are becoming aware of what you truly are. And when you see yogis, or you read about yogis that are can meditate for hours on end, and many times we approach that and we think that they are forcing themselves to do it, like it is an extreme discipline. And for some it is. But once you start to break through to the later limbs of yoga, which we'll see as we go through this discussion here, it becomes enjoyable. So they're not forcing themselves to sit for hours on end. They are internally directed and engaged, abiding as the self, which is free, feels free, has the experience of freedom. and there's nothing else they'd rather be doing. And that's a very good state to be in. And that's, in a sense, what we're working through. That's how we're working through our desires and our attachments. We're aiming to go to that state. That way, when it's time for the body to perish or the mind to change, it's okay, we can do it. Because we are aware of what life is rather than what the expression of life is. So, this is what yoga is doing for us.